This is the integumentary skin model. That's what we're going to go over here real quick. It's going to be on our next practical. We have a lot of structures to go over. So look at this glorious thing. How amazing. One of my favorite models that we have. Alright, so let's get to it. Let's start off first with the major layers of the skin, and then the kind of a bonus layer, if you will. We have the epidermis. Epidermis. Alright, it starts there, this little blue line, and it goes all the way up to the top. That is the epidermis. Epidermis, the outermost layer. Now next is the dermis. The dermis, the durable dermis, as some say. And it picks up around this area-ish and goes all the way up to this area, and this is underside of these little blue lines. So there's little hills here, these little, I don't know, peach-looking hills, that type of color. Those are all part of the dermis. Dermis. Now the epidermis and dermis have some layers to them. We're going to get to that in just a second. But next up we have the hypodermis. What? Now this is technically not part of the skin, but it's a little bonus feature, and it helps connect the skin to the underlying features, and this is where it's found, approximately. The hypodermis has a lot of fat in it, so these cells here, these little yellow blobs, mustard-looking blobs, those are fat cells. So this is all for the hypodermis, also called the subcutaneous. Alright, so let's get to those layers of the epidermis. So let's start off there. If we adjust, we're going to start off with our first layer, the stratum corneum. It's these first three layers. All three of those, stratum corneum. Next up, stratum lucidum. Seen here, the point of the pencil. So that's the stratum lucidum. Now typically on skin with hair like this, you would not see the stratum lucidum. It's only found in thick skin areas, so palms of your hands, soles of your feet. But for our purposes, that is lucidum. So make sure you know it, what the pencil is pointing to. All right. Next, stratum granulosum. It's grand. And you can see it here where the pencil is pointing to. This little pale blue-ish area. Some would call it a stormy blue, perhaps. But that's the stratum granulosum. And then we have this stratum spinosum, where the pencil is pointing to. So you can see that, stratum spinosum. And then last, but certainly not least, because this whole thing wouldn't exist without it, the stratum basale. The basale layer, if you want to sound fancy. And that is that, the stratum basal. All right, so those are the layers. Each one of them has their own properties that will be talked about at another point in time. But for now, that's good enough. Now let's move on down to the dermis and the layers of the dermis. There are two. First of which is the papillary layer. Papillary layer starts about here-ish, and then it goes up and includes this area here. So these little structures, all those hills, which are going to be called the dermal papilla. Ha, it makes sense. And the layer is the reticular layer, and it's the rest of the dermis. So reticular layer, the focused up, all right, is here-ish, all the way down to where the hypodermis will begin. All right, so those are the dermal layers. Now let's look at some structures. Let's start off one of my favorites, the erector pili muscle. Yes, and here it is. There's one there and one over here. The erector pili muscle. These things help raise your hairs up in times of, well, stress, excitement, frightening things. So a lot of that stuff is caused by this. So make sure hair raises up. You can see its connection to those hair follicles. All right, next up, dermal papilla. These things are found up here. Now they're part of the dermis, hence dermal. And they're part of the papillary layer, hence papillae. So these little raisings here. And now these usually carry blood vessels, which you can kind of see here. And these help supply the cells of the stratum basal with the nutrients they need to stay alive. So these actually have a pretty important function of increasing surface area to help maintain that tissue area, that lining. Next up, sebaceous gland. Like oily hair, well, if you do, it's because of the sebaceous gland. It also secretes some oils that release in the skin. Makes something called sebum. So sebaceous glands found all over the body. Some are attached to hair, some are not. It just depends. And then sweat glands. What would we be without sweat, especially here in Florida, where it is hot all the time? So here's a sweat gland, here's a sweat gland, and then over here is a sweat gland. So notice there's a difference between these two. There are different types of sweat glands, which we'll get into at a later point. For now, though, just know the sweat glands. And sweat glands are also called sudoriferous glands. Next up, the hair follicle. And well, you can see the hair down to the follicle. So, hair follicle. Yeah. All right, blood vessels, one of the easiest things to spot. So these blue tubes and these red tubes, well, lo and behold, those are blood vessels. And it's filled up this area. So notice how much blood supply is going to this area. It needs to feed the upper layers of the epidermis to keep them alive. And this entire area is all living tissue. And so it needs nutrients to stay alive, to do what it needs to do. So a lot of blood here, which is why, you can bleed a good bit from, cuts. But note, if you just cut this area up here, there's no blood flow to this area, so you won't actually bleed there. You have to get deeper to actually get some blood to come out. So I guess that's useful information. All right, next up, the melanocyte, found here. And this is the one that can go rogue on you and cause melanoma. That's bad. But in general, melanocytes are awesome. They create melanin, and that's part of the pigmentation of skin. So how much melanin you have determines skin color. Pretty easy. Melanocyte found there, a little raisinette looking thing, and I love me some raisinettes, so I'm always really fond of the melanocytes. Raisinettes are delicious. They're chocolate covered raisins. If you haven't had them before, I'd recommend it if you're not allergic to chocolate or raisins. And melanocytes are awesome too, because they help us fight skin hazards, UV, all that kind of stuff. Bad. Yeah, there's our melanocyte. All right, now let's get to some sensory stuff. So free nerve ending, found here. So dead center. So if you were to touch this, it's got a little flatter in texture, and then just helps sense some pain and some overall impulses for the skin. It gets hurt if you hurt your skin. You feel it, right? So these nerve endings help play a role with that. We also have the hair follicle receptor. And this is part of the nervous input for hair. So when you can feel sensations with your hair, it's actually one of the main functions of hair, is for sensory pickups in the environment. And so like whiskers and things like that, and cats, dogs, other animals, your own hair can be used to detect various stimuli in the environment. You can feel stuff with it. That's what that's for. If you pluck hairs, right, it hurts. If somebody yanks on your hair, that can not feel great. So, these nerves play a role with that. All right, now we're gonna get down to old Merkel, the tactile epithelial cell. If you notice, here it is. So this is the Merkel cell, aka tactile epithelial cell. It has raised endings on it, so if we touch it, it's kind of bulbous. And that's it. It helps with light touch, and if it's in the epidermis, so that makes sense. And that's where it likes to hang out. So, old Merkel. Merkel always reminds me of Steve Urkel, and this just looks like quite the character. If you don't know who Steve Urkel is, check out a YouTube video. It's entertaining. All right, next up, while we're up top, let's look at the tactile corpuscle. Tactile corpuscle. Or corpuscle, however you want to say it. I don't care. Say it so you remember it. Anyway, this is one. Notice the nervous input on the inside. And if we scroll over a little bit, there's another one, this little red bean looking thing. Not this. That's not the tactile corpuscle. This is the tactile corpuscle. Yeah. More touch, more sensing. And tactile, right? Near touching, that sort of stuff. This is near the epidermis, so it makes sense. But this is part of the papillae layer of the dermis. Let's roll on down a bit and look at the bulbous corpuscle, and that would be this item over here. So where the pencil's pointing to, that's the bulbous corpuscle. These bean-looking things. These help with pressure and stretch sensations of the general senses. And then finally, we have the laminar corpuscle. Now this little sucker is found right down here. This green-looking thing. Also, if we scroll over, this thing where the pencil's pointing to, and then this thing. So it's an olive greenish looking thing. It's also used for pressure and for stretch. And that's it, the laminar corpuscle. And that is it for all the structures you need to know for this system. Oh, other various things. So keratinocytes are found in here. These are cells of the epidermis. There's many ones of those. And yeah, I think that's it. So that's it. See you.